everybody, welcome back to yet another video. Now, I have done in the past several videos on overclocking anything from graphics cards to Intel CPUs, but despite the fact that I've been running with fancy high-end Ryzen chips, I haven't done a single video on it, so that's what we're going to be doing today. We'll go ahead and not be overclocking my 3950X system, we'll be overclocking this, my Ryzen 9 3900X system, because, well, I haven't actually done a proper overclock on it yet, so I can go ahead and show you, one, how it's done, and actually, two, sort out an overclock for myself. So we'll go ahead and jump straight into it after the intro. Alright, so here we are on the desktop here. Right, the first thing that you're going to need is this. It's called AMD Ryzen Master. This is essentially what we'll be doing to overclocking in software. Now, you have, of course, got the option to overclock. Yeah. Oh, excuse me. You do, of course, have the option to overclock in your BIOS, but personally, I prefer doing it, well, like this, simply because, hey, it gives you more flexibility in what you're actually doing, because, whilst sure you can do it in the BIOS, and that's great and all, but if you don't want to be pressing the reset button 1,000,001 times, it's honestly better to do it like this, because most of the time it will reset to stock settings once it restarts if it crashes, which is honestly kind of nice. Doesn't always, but for the most part, this is generally a lot nicer to use. So this is what we will be doing first. So now there are a couple ways that you can go ahead and test your overclocks. Generally speaking, this is not the way that you go ahead and test a stress test. This is simply to confirm or deny that the overclock isn't going to crash immediately. So we're just going to try and move Cinebench out of the way, make it as small as possible so we can see what we're doing. Right, so first thing you do, running at stock, get a baseline result. Also, when you do this, make sure that your BIOS is the most current version, because Ryzen Master goes off what your BIOS reports, and sometimes can be a bit iffy if it doesn't have, you know, the full details that it's supposed to have. Okay, so we're turboing up to 4 GHz. Currently sitting around 80 degrees. A bit toasty. Might try and see if we can go ahead and bring it down. What's our current voltage? We're sitting at 1.35, so we can see if we can bring that down too. Bring that into frame for you so you can see the result. Okay, so our stock result is 7,072. Now what we're going to do is go into manual over here, reset profile to stock. There we go, so we can just straight up, yep, that way, synchronize everything. Right. Well, we saw that it went up to 1.35, so we'll try 1.3. Additional control, don't need that. We don't need memory control. Okay, so we can just expand these out and have a look. See, right, they're currently running at 3.8, which is the stock. So we are pushing up to, I'll do it the easy way, 4,000. Hit apply. It should now be running at 4,000 megahertz or 4 gigahertz. At 1.3 volts, so we're going to go into home. Right, that should go ahead and run. We'll click run again, and we'll go ahead and test for stability. Now, all this is doing is that it's confirming that the overclock isn't immediately going to overheat or die. If you are doing this, you should be using something like OCCT, but because I use this system anyway on eco mode, I already know that thermals on a over a long period of time aren't exactly the best and not ideal for it. So we're currently sitting at 79. It's running a bit toasty, but it is running with less voltage. See, we're currently at 105 watts, so we're still actually within the stock spec for it. It's just it is running pretty hot. There we go, 7,011. So we've basically matched our stock speed with our overclock. Okay, so what we can do now is we can either increase the voltage and try and increase that, or we can decrease it. For now, we want to go ahead and see what this can do, so we'll go ahead and pump it up to 4050, because you don't want to be doing too huge increments on this. Hit run again, go back to home, and we'll basically do this for a bit until the system just outright crashes whilst doing this. Now, for general reference, the voltages, as far as I'm aware, if you're doing it as a sort of daily driver, or anything where you're going to be using, it for long periods of time at these high clocks, one, make sure you've got good cooling, and two, try and keep your voltage below 1.25. because we're only really doing this to go ahead and show off what you can do with an overclock if you really want to go ahead and push it, or if you're not really doing all core loads, you could potentially do it at higher, at higher voltages, but you are still risking damage to the CPU. Okay, and that extra 50 megahertz has gained us an extra 100 points. So, okay, that ran fine. We'll go ahead and bump up another 50. Essentially, all we're doing is just running through, seeing how it runs. If it crashes, bad. If it doesn't crash, great. If it does crash, then obviously we know that our overclock's too hot and we go to the previous setting. So for example, if it crashed on this one, then we know it doesn't work at 4100, but it does work at 4050. So then we can change it to 4075, which is halfway in between, and that is the limits of how much we can go ahead and modify there. But what we can then do is go through our various cores. See how these are CC axes? We can basically go through the various ones of these to make sure that these can go as fast as they possibly can. It's all a matter of just getting your baseline, knowing what runs stable, and then tuning it as you go along. So okay, 4100 works, that's great for me. So we'll go ahead and change it up to 4150. Right, so running at 4149. It is running quite a bit hotter now. We are using an extra 6 watts, well, an extra 5 to 6 watts. But so far it's going okay. Peak voltage seems to be stable. This is good. It's nice when it's not crashing immediately. Obviously these temperatures are way too hot for daily use. So this is another thing that you need to pay attention to. Whatever your daily OC is, try and make sure that if it's on an extended load, let's say you use something like Thermark, OCCT, whatever. If you use anything where it's going to be basically hitting that CPU all the time, what you want to do is make sure that this, specifically this, is not going to be overheating. Generally speaking, my target goal is sub 80 degrees Celsius. Once you go after 80, that's sort of when you sort of approach CPU degradation, especially with higher voltages. If you can keep it below 80, however, then that's great. But either way, this passed, so we can go ahead and bump it up once more. Yeah, like I said, if you are doing overclocking like this, with Ryzen specifically, in my opinion, try and stay below 1.25 volts and below 80 degrees C if it's like a daily OC. So one-time thing, or you're just trying to get the max performance out of your CPU, okay, just don't do it until the day's end. Just do it until you've got to go ahead and got a nice baseline on what it can really do. That's the reason why I usually keep a daily OC, but also an extreme OC. So something that isn't going to overheat it, and something that also will overheat it if I use it all the time, but I can use for like competitive overclocking or something like that. So okay, so we passed that one, 7292. We didn't really see a huge improvement, so we can move up to 4250. So watching how it's going, and it's crashed. So we know that 4250 was too hot for it. So we know, obviously, that now 4250, that was too hot. 4200, however, at 1.3, that's okay. So what we'll try now is 4225. If it crashes again, then we know 4200 is our max for all of our cores. Okay. So as we saw then, that didn't go to plan. It crashed. We're now back into it. We should be running at 16, 18, 18, 18, yeah. Okay, so of course it crashed, not ideal, but this is okay for us now because we are back into it and we're back to our settings at last time. So we know that 4250 was too much, so what we're going to do now is go up to 4225. Okay, we'll hit apply, run the CPU, and let's see what it does. Does it crash again? Or does it succeed? So, it's going. It's not crashed yet. It might crash. It might not. We will see once it ends the test. Okay, so it passed that one. So we know that 4225 is now our new baseline on what we can consider stable enough for this. So now the next thing that we need to do is uncouple, because obviously we know that 4250 is too much for all of them. However, it might not be too much for the fastest cores in each, because as you may noticed, see how you've got these little stars next to them? This is essentially telling you what is the fastest core even, of each one of these. So of course you see how gold stars, those are the fastest core of one CCD. So you've got CCD1, CCD2, these are your two core cluster dies, then you've got your CCXs, which are the actual core clusters within the dies, and essentially they go ahead and group them together by each little group. So this is the fastest of the two. Let's just check. Second fastest core of CCX0 and CC. Okay, so this is definitely the fastest of the two. So what we can do here is we can enter in here 4250, hit apply, run it again, and now hopefully it should run without crashing, because this is supposed to be the fastest core on this side. Now it doesn't mean that this is naturally all the fastest, but it does generally mean that these two will be the more stable ones, which means hopefully this one should also be more stable. Doesn't guarantee it, but it sort of works like that anyway. Okay, so we passed that one, that's great. Now we can either continue to tune this one or start tuning the others. We're going to continue to tune this one for now, because we want to make sure that this core at least is the fastest it can possibly go. So we'll go ahead and change this to 42. Actually, hold on, before we do, hit save. Let's save profile. 4275. Hit apply. Hopefully it will run 4275 on these cores. Now generally the biggest difference that you may see from core to core performance and what it can handle is around about 100 to 200 megahertz. Me on my 3950X, I've seen a 100 megahertz between my best and worst cores and how much they can handle at a certain voltage. But that of course can vary from CPU to CPU. It might only be 25 megahertz, it might be 1. You don't know until you go ahead and run it. Okay, so that's good. So we can go ahead and consider this somewhat stable. We'll go ahead and change this now to 4300. See if it'll go ahead and handle 75 hertz more than the rest. Well, 75 megahertz more than the rest. Okay, and it passed that test. You can see we are now up to 7518. So we know that so far it's now stable at 4300 on these cores over here. Now we're going to go ahead and try pushing it up again. Hit apply, and hopefully it won't crash. If it does crash, however, of course, we'll have to go ahead and bring that back down to 4300 and then continue to tune the next set of cores. Oh, okay, so 4325, that was too unstable. It didn't crash the system, but it did crash Cinebench. So we can go ahead and reopen Cinebench. That's running fine. Set that up to that, and we will move on to the next cores, which we'll move on to over here, which is the fastest cores of CCD0. I like to do the fastest cores first, then the secondary ones afterwards, so we know how fast roughly each die can push up to. So we'll push this one up to 4250, hit apply, and let's see what this one can do. I will say this, so far things are looking pretty promising. We're staying below 90C, which means we're definitely away from an extreme OC failure. But we are, of course, still able to push pretty decently high. Considering that this is generally only supposed to run at 3.8 GHz all core, the fact that we've got even one of them on 4350 is actually kind of impressive. Okay, so 4225, that is the hard limit over here. So what we can do now is move on to these ones. So we'll have these by 25 megahertz, see how it runs, and hopefully it'll be fine. Hopefully. Might not be, but we will find out. Okay, so we've gone ahead and passed that with an extra 25 on that CCX over here. So we'll add again another 25, bringing it up to 4275, and we will see if it can handle it. Now the other things that we'll do is that once we've assessed what is the fastest that each set can actually do, well then we'll go ahead and assess on what voltages they can do it. Because alternatively you could go ahead and push the voltage higher and go even faster, but we're not trying to kill this CPU, we're trying to, put in a nice stable overclock. So that ran fine, we'll hit save here, 4300 on CCX1, so that means that CCD1 is running at 4225 and CCD0 is running at 4300. They really need a better naming scheme. Why do they start at 0? Okay, and Cinebench just crashed, so we can assess. Yeah, Cinebench is completely balked. Yeah, and test. Okay, so there we go. We have got 4275 as the fastest that core will boost up to. without crashing Cinebench. Now back over here. Now there is a couple of possibilities of what happened here, and one of them is that this core here is slower than the rest, which is why this lot crashed, which means we'll also now try to boost up the final 3 cores. Bump, hit apply, actually limit, apply, save, and now we're going to be running with 4250 on the final set of cores. Okay, so it's official, so we can run 4300 on CCX0 of CCD1, or CCD0 even. We can run 4275 on CCX1 of CCD0. But I'm just going to go core clusters 1, 2, 3, and 4, because this is a lot easier. So core cluster 1, CCD0, that can run 4300. Core cluster 2, 4275. Core clusters 3 and 4, 4225 each. Okay, right, we're back at it after a little bit of waiting, but we are back at it. Okay, so what we're going to do now is that we know that these run stable enough. So what we're going to try and do is, 1, make sure that this is saved and it's not going to change, and we're going to drop the voltage down just a smidge and see where we can get that voltage down to. Because whilst it is great having a decent overclock that goes to a nice high speed, it's also great to go ahead and drop the voltage down, because that means it uses less power. It generates less heat, and if it generates less heat, then it's less likely to, crash. Because really there's a whole sort of trifecta of overclocking. You've got your voltage, you've got your clock speed, and you've got heat. In order to get a high clock speed, you need a high voltage. In order to not overheat, or potentially make your overclock unstable, you need to keep your heat very low, but a high voltage brings that heat up. So obviously, if we can go ahead and bring our voltage down enough, we might actually regain some stability because it's not running as hot. Alternatively, it may just crash outright because it needs enough voltage to keep the clock speed. But so far, 1.29375 is looking fine, so we'll drop that down to 1287, hit apply, hit run, and hope that it runs. Also keep in mind that this was running originally at like 1.35 volts, 4 gigahertz, so this is running considerably less voltage, with also a considerably high gain over the original stock. And okay, so 12875 is out, 129375 is in, and that's our very fast overclock. Now what we can also do is apply, copy current, rename. So this one will be our extreme OC, and that one can be our eco and daily OC. So we're going to go ahead and save this profile here. And okay, right, so we know that works. We can now go to cancel that, over to manual here. Right, so we're going to try and see if we can get 4 gigahertz, 1.25 volts, because that would be ideal. So 4 gigahertz on everything, 1.25 volts, drop that to one side, hit apply, save profile, go to home, and open up Cinebench. Now what we're doing now is we're trying to sort out a daily OC, so the aim here is to keep the temperature below 80°C. Now generally if we're doing this, we should be doing something like OCCT that'll actually put it through a genuine stress test, but for now this will do for our needs. So you can see that it's heating up, 74.92, it is heating up slowly though, so it should stay under 78. Okay, so our top temperature was 78.44 and we managed to score 7087, which means we are actually still well over my original result down here when I first got the CPU, which is probably due to drivers and other things. But yeah, so we have gained some performance and we know that this is stable, so we can hit save profile and drop our peak core voltage down 1, hit run again, go to home, and keep doing this until we have a nice stable overclock that doesn't get too hot, doesn't use too much power, and gives us considerable performance. Because 12 cores at 4 gigahertz on AMD, pretty damn nice. Okay, so completed that one. We went ahead and succeeded, so we can hit save profile, make sure it's definitely applied, drop the voltage once more. We're now down to 42375. We did start at 1.25, so we've dropped almost 0.02, which may not sound like a lot, but it can make a hell of a difference. So run the CPU, and let's see how it goes. Now obviously it is running a bit hotter out the gate now, because on top of that it's now actually heated up the water in our AIO. But as you can see, it's not really climbing that rapidly. It's only sitting at around about 77, 78, and not climbing much further than that. Obviously it is still climbing, but hopefully we can get that below 80 with a couple more voltage drops. And in fact it is actually sticking around the mid 78s. It's jumping into 79, but it does appear to be going up and down, so we might actually be reaching the peak of what this AIO will go ahead and push out. And we finished that one successfully. We managed to gain an extra couple of points. Let's go ahead and finish it off. We're now back pretty successfully. Okay, so we're going to keep doing this until we get a final result. Okay, so it looks like I have finally managed to get a rough daily OC that is moderately stable. So we are running at 4 GHz on here at 1.15 volts. Now what happened whilst I was probably doing this for God knows how long is that we eventually got down to around about 1.31 something or other. But at that point it did actually start to crash, so we went ahead and bumped it up a bit. Still crashing a little bit. We've gone ahead and bumped it back up to 1.15. And now it seems to be running mostly stably. Now, obviously this isn't saying this is a stable overclock, this is saying that it's stable for what we've been doing. What you'd really want to do is pull up something like good old OCCT, let that load up, and then you'd go ahead and do a CPU stress test on here to make sure it's not going to overheat anytime soon. So what you'd probably do is, which one's more stressful? Really stressful, yada yada yada. 2019, you'd run something like this and you'd go ahead and let that run until you were happy with it. Generally speaking, you should be running this for hours. Me personally, I usually run it for around about half an hour, and if it survives half an hour, then I'd consider it to be pretty much okay and unlikely to crash. But that is something that you guys can do at home, because this video has gone on long enough. I'm gonna have a lot of footage to sift through it by the end of this. So we will go ahead and jump back out of this to the conclusion and other things to keep in mind. So there you have it. That's how you go ahead and use the Ryzen Master software. Now the alternative way to do it is in BIOS. I personally don't like doing BIOS because, as I've said, you have to do reset buttons if stuff goes wrong, if you don't have it inbuilt. It just seems to be a lot more work than it's personally worth, considering that Ryzen Master is a pretty good utility and it's a lot easier. It's literally just a couple of megabytes, download it, install it within seconds, honestly. And yeah, should you overclock? Well, it all depends on your situation. If you're using something like this with a really tiny cooler, not really. You could do what I was doing towards the end there, which is really a mix of overclocking but also underclocking, you know, getting a higher clock speed with a lower voltage. Or you can go ahead and do something else. Generally speaking though, do be careful, because more than likely you're going to invalidate your warranty if you do any form of overclocking. Most don't really go ahead and support that in the warranty. You can do it, but just the whole factor of that's down to you. Now there are some real gains to be made with overclocking. For example, 3950X can go ahead and get as much as a 10 to 20% performance gain if you're really careful and you play your cards right. Same over here, you will get performance gains, it's just a matter of playing it right, make sure you don't go too overboard, and of course you don't want to degrade your CPU, which is the main thing. Overclocking can degrade your CPU, and I have heard many stories of, you know, specifically the newer Ryzen CPUs getting degraded mainly because of motherboards not reporting their power correctly and causing other issues. That means that they clocked faster than they were supposed to, even though, you know. Either way, get the idea. If you do overclock, update your BIOS. Always make sure it's the most current version and it's a tested version that isn't a beta BIOS, just a solid BIOS that is known to work. But yeah, that's how you overclock. It's fun, it's great, you can get some real performance gains, but for the most part, hey, these Ryzen CPUs are that good at stock, you don't really need to. You can get a performance gain, but for the most part, you really don't need to when you've got a high core count. So yeah, hope you enjoy the video, and we will go ahead and end it here. So like it if you like it, dislike it if you dislike it. Any thoughts or questions, leave the form of a comment down below. Links to the Ryzen Master software also in the description down below. Also down there you can find my Facebook, Twitch, Patreon, and of course my Discord server page, which will all be down in the description below for you to go and join or check out if you so wish. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell for more content from me. As always, this is the 117th Con, signing off. Stay safe folks, and I will catch you all in the next one. Until then, ta-ra.